Welcome to Cinema 4D. We're going to be building a table today, and the first thing we're going to do is place in a primitive figure for scaling purposes. So now that I have this figure, I'm going to be creating a basic cube and scaling that down to form the shape of a table. Now that we have that scale relationship, I'm going to delete the figure. I'm going to click on cube, and I'm going to make sure that I have display garage shading with lines on. So this is the approximate size of our tabletop. You're welcome to make the tabletop your own shape as long as you're going to be using the tools that we're going to be describing in this lesson. So now that I have that built, I'm going to go into 4-up mode and come over to top mode. I'm going to turn on display garage shading with lines, and then I'm going to go into faces mode. But before we do that, we need to click on our cube and come down here to go from a primitive to a polygon by pressing make editable. So I'm going to be using faces to make cuts. I'm going to be clicking on edges, coming down to my knife tool and selecting loop path cut. And I'm going to be making segments for our legs to come out of. So I'm going to cut once here, twice. I'm going to make 2 cuts here for our legs until I have 4 spots total. Now I have these 4 legs total. I can even refine them, move them around, and we're just going to be going over this so we can look into, instead of making things with primitives, we're going to be using this polygon and editing it. So now I'm going to select face mode, and I'm going to select my 4 faces. 1, shift click on my additional faces. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to right click and come to inset and click and drag inward. So I did that once. Now I'm going to do it a second time, click and drag inward. And I'm going to, now that I have these 4 feet selected, I'm going to come over and use another tool. I'm going to right click and come to extrude. Now that I have extrude selected, I can click and drag up. I won't be able to see that until I come into my perspective mode. So let's do that again. I'm going to click and drag up to create the first part of my leg. Now that I have that done, I'm going to zoom out, and we're going to practice the inset again by right-clicking and going to inset. Click and drag in once, click and drag in again, and now I'm going to do another extrude. Right-click, extrude, and click and drag up. So you can see by practicing this over and over again, it's going to get much more familiar to you, and you'll build a muscle memory. So when you're building a character or whatever you might decide, it's going to be much simpler. So I'm going to do that 3 times to practice that, another time for inset, click and drag inward, another time for extrude, click and drag up. And now we're going to do, for the 3rd time, we're recycling our content so it becomes easier. I'm going to build some legs for this by clicking and going to inset again, click and drag inward, click and drag inward. And now we're going to make some small feet. by going to extrude. So now that we have that done, I'm going to zoom out. You can see we have our table, and we're going to be showing the benefits of adding more cuts in your material. Will add a sharper edge when you placing it in a subdivision surface, and where you have less cuts will make a much smoother and organic shape. So let's go ahead to our knife tool again. First, we need to select edges. Then we're going to come down to our knife tool, select our knife tool, and select a loop path cut. By the way, we can also select that by going K and L. So you have the choice if you want to speed up that operation. And I'm going to do 3 cuts here, close to each other, so we can see how this is going to be affected. And we're going to do another 3 cuts here. Now that we have that done, I'm going to place this as a child into a subdivision surface, and we'll see how this area is different, affected differently than this area. I'm selecting our generator tool, then I'm selecting subdivision surface, and I'm going to call this table and place our table as a child of our subdivision surface. Now that we have that done, let's take a look at this edge where we have very few cuts, and we can see that's nice and soft. So let's take a look at our options under subdivision surface. As you can see, the type is Catmull Clark, which was named after one of the Pixar engineers that developed this type of technique. I'm going to increase my subdivision viewport and renders to 4. And you can see that when I did that, look, it's gotten much smoother. It's added a lot more typology to this area and how rounded and organic that is, as opposed to this area where we put a lot more cuts is much sharper. Let's take a look at with subdivision surface turned off and on. So by pressing the Q key, I can turn it off. You can see the additional cuts I placed over here in relationship to where I have no cuts on this end. And now let's press the Q key again and turn that back on. You can see how our legs are also smooth and rounded and organic. And then pressing Q, I've turned that off. So subdivision surface is a great tool to have in your toolbox from a very low poly, meaning there's very few polygons in this. There's very little typology here, but by pressing Q, we have a much more organic and complex shape. And we've created this from 1 polygon, originally starting out with 1 polygon. Now that we have our table built, I'm going to double click here. I'm going to call this table. And let's turn it right side up by selecting table, pressing R for rotation. And I'm going to start turning that and then hold down the shift key, and I can go in 5-degree increments until I have this 180 degrees flipped. I'm going to press E for move. Then I'm going to hold down the shift button, and I'm going to raise it till it's sitting on our floor level. Boom. So we have our table, we have it named, and we have it scaled appropriately to a 6-foot figure. Now that we have that done, let's start creating our chair. So importantly, I'm going to hit File, Save, and I'm going to save that into a folder I created. Let's create a folder. I'm going to call that lock and key assets, create. Inside of that folder, I'm going to create a C4D folder, and I'm going to call my file lock and key assets underscore v01. And that's important so we can save chronologically. I'm going to hit save. And since I have my first object done, you'll find it's beneficial because you will crash, your program will crash as you start making more complex items. I'm going to go save incremental. And notice that when I do that, it's incremented up to V02. The next thing I'm going to do for safety is I'm going to make sure that I have Cinema 4D preferences. I'm going to make sure when I click on File that I have autosave turned on, and I'm going to have my most recent 30 files or more saved automatically every 5 minutes. The next thing I'm going to do under Preferences is I'm going to click under Units, and I'd like to be working in inches. So I'm going to go from centimeters to inches, and that looks good. So I'm going to hit Command S for save, and now I'm going to create my chair. So I'm going to go into front mode, and I'm going to load in my chair into my front orthographic view. To do that, I'm going to go View, Configure, Back. So again, View, Configure, Back, and we do need to make sure that we are in front mode. Otherwise, this won't work. Now that I have that done, I took a screen capture of my reference chair image. I'm going to load that in by clicking on this folder here. And I prepared these images in lock and key schematic. You can take my image or you can choose one of your own. The school does want us to create a lathed object. So I have a master chair. And what I'm going to need to do now is scale that down in relationship to the scale of my table. And if you notice under back, I have scale. I can scale this down proportionately. And I'd like to take this somewhat to this scale. It doesn't have to be absolutely exact. And I can offset it on the y-axis. The main thing that we need to be concerned with is that we have this leg perfectly centered where the red and the green meet. So I can do that by scrubbing on my x-axis until I have that centered here. And now that I have that done, I'm going to start creating this lathed object. So I can do that by first clicking on points, then going to Bezier path. I'm on my Bezier pen, and I'm going to choose Bezier, the Bezier mode, but you can also use linear, cubic, B-spline. But if you're used to Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, you'll be familiar with the Bezier system. So I need to start here and then work my way out by clicking and dragging. Notice that I'm not just clicking, 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 but I'm clicking and dragging to have a nice, smooth, organic shape. If I need to make a 90-degree turn, I can click and hold down the Shift button and move this up. So hold down my Shift, Now I have a right degree turn, and I'm going to be working my way up this leg. The secret is to click and drag, forming that nice smooth Bezier line. That's very organic. Holding down my shift key. Now I'm at the top, holding down my shift key and coming in back to my green line, and then stopping when I reach the green line, zooming out. Remember to press the escape button to exit from this tool, and then we can create the next type of generator. If I hold over, you can remember we used the subdivision surface to make the table. We've used the extrude tool. Now we're going to use the lathe tool by clicking and releasing on lathe, and then making the spline a child of the lathe tool. So you're not going to see that yet, but if we center click, I'm going to make my table invisible. And now we can see that we have a lathed object in our perspective view. And it's infinitely editable. If we go into our points, we're going to use this as one leg. So if I come back in, I have this as one leg. I could then, I'm going to call that leg. I'm going to Command C to copy, and then press E. I did Command C, Command V, and I'm going to move that over to this. And in our orthographic view, we can see where each one of these is located. Now I'm going to copy the leg here, Command C, Command V. I'm going to go into top view now, and I'm going to move this leg, as you can see, back. I'm going to copy and paste, and then move this over. So with my schematic drawing, I can see where everything is lining up. Now I'm going to, instead of making these back pieces, I'm going to actually scale them up non-proportionally by selecting one of the legs, pressing T for transform. And if I click the green, I can scale this up non-proportionally, and I can see in my front orthographic view that I'm satisfied with this. Now that I have that scaled up, I can copy and paste, press E to move, and we have all four pillars of our chair. I can check that out in my perspective mode here. I'm going to save this, And then I'm going to start extruding these sections of the chair so I get these slats here. So I can start the process by coming into point mode, going into my spline pen, and I'm going to do this slat first, and then I can copy and paste them to produce the other slots. I do need to go all the way around this. Okay, I have one done. There's no reason to do them all. And now we're going to use our third tool by clicking on our generator and coming over to extrude. I'm going to make my spline a child of the extrude. I'm going to I'm going to call this slat. And now I'm going to come in perspective mode. We can see that this slat is way too thick. So I'm going to click on slat and scrub on our generator on our offset until it looks nice. That is looking good to me. To make this look realistic, I'm going to press on caps and increase the size of the caps. And I'm going to take the offset to 0.5, and that looks good to me. I'm going to click on slat, press E for move, and move that back. And now you can see that the slat is here. It's matching up. I might want to reduce the size by pressing T and scaling that down. Pressing E, and I can move that. By being in 4-up mode, you have a lot more control. There we go. So that's our first slat. It doesn't have to be exact. Now, if I zoom out, I can copy and paste this slat and move it upwards. And I could do the same thing again. Move that upwards. And now, one more time, copy and paste. And we'll have each of these prepared. There we go. I'm going to come back in perspective mode, and you can see that we're all ready except for our seat for our basic chair. So I'm going to use a cube as the seat, T for transform. I'm going to make this into a polygon by pressing make editable. I'm going to select my top face and bring that down. And now I'm going to come into top mode so I can see exactly how to align this. I'm going to press E. I do want to make sure I'm going to go into model mode so I can select all points, edges, and faces and move that into the correct position. I can see where the seat is. down here. And then notice that since we do have a polygon, I can scale this by and using my points, edges, and faces. So here I'm selecting one face. By pressing T, I can transform this. Look at that. I can make a seat that is fitting into this model. I can then drag that back some. There we go. And I'd like to give this a nice relaxed shape as a cushion might be. So again, I'm going to select my subdivision surface, make the cube a child of the subdivision surface. And I'd like to add additional cuts. So this isn't so, I'm going to add some additional cuts to this so it's not too organic. So I'm going to come over to my cube and I'm going to make cuts by going to my knife tool, loop path cut, just like we did. And I'm going to add one cut here, another cut here, one cut here, another cut here, and do the same on this side. Let's see what happens when I place this into a subdivision surface. There we go. So that's looking much better. Now that we have that done, I'm going to name everything. And I'm going to start texturing this. But I do see that I'd like this to be shorter, so everything is always editable. I'm going to press Model Mode, Brush Selection, select my two legs, and disproportionately scale them down by pressing T for Transform. And now if I take in my orthographic view, if I just drag down vertically, I can make them much shorter. And I can drag them in by pressing E, drag them back. Now that's looking much better to me. You're going to have control on yours, so you can make it your own in your own creative designs. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to texturize this now. I'm going to be using Redshift as my render engine. And to do that, I'm going to select Render Settings. I'm going to make sure I'm on Redshift. And I'm going to bring up my interactive render mode. So I'm going to go under Redshift, and I'm going to use my Redshift render view. So Redshift render view. I'm going to press the play button. I'm going to zoom in by option right-clicking and dragging. And now I'm going to open up my material asset browser drawer. I always like to keep that closed if I'm not using it, so I can use my screen real estate in the best way possible. And now I'm going to press on Materials, and I'm going to select Wood. Enter. Notice that I'd like to only use wood that has a red dot next to it, meaning that these are Redshift materials built specifically for the Redshift renderer. And I'm going to click, once I found one that's for Redshift. By the way, if you only want to see Redshift materials, we can delete this. I kind of like to doing this better, coming to Materials. These are going to be all Redshift. Then I'm going to press on Wood. And these are all going to be redshift. So I prefer to do it this way. I just wanted to show you both ways. So we have planked wood, we have colored wood. Some are best for flooring like these. Some are best for what we're doing. I'm going to choose a solid piece of wood and click and drag that over to my slats. So Cinema 4D makes it easy. I could choose to have another texture on my legs. These are more floor oriented. This is an antique wood. There we go. And now I'm going to choose a fabric, redshift fabric, come over to fabrics. I could choose, they have a lot of good fabrics here. You can make the thumbnails larger by over using this interactive bar here, and I'll drag this fabric over. So now I have my chair. I'm going to click play so I can see that. And that's a render, current render that we have. So now that I have that done, I'll select all of this by clicking Shift and then hitting Option G, placing it in a null and calling that chair. Turning on my table. And I'm going to go back to wood and give my table a wood texture. I'm going to close my drawer for my asset browser. I'm going to be taking my chair and placing 4 of them underneath the table by hitting E, moving that down, T for transform, clicking and dragging, E to move that under. Now we have one chair. I think it might look better, a little bit smaller. And now I'm going to place a few of them under the table so they're not touching each other. Let's put 2 more on the sides. Press R for rotate. I'm going to drag by this green tool axis until I hit 90 degrees. I find it useful to be in 4-up mode so I can see exactly where I'm placing that. And now I can drag it in. I'm disproportionately scaling that by touching the red axis and dragging that in. Now I can Command C, Command V, pressing E to move, R to rotate, pressing the Shift key to go in 5-degree increments until I hit -180, pressing E to move. There we go. Now we have the whole table done. I'm even going to make it simpler by taking all of my chairs and putting them into one null by selecting them, Option G, saying chairs, Enter, Command S to save, and now File, Save Incremental. We're up to V03. Now we're going to make our glassware for our table. And so let's go ahead and do that by coming back over to our front mode. Let's see what exactly which asset we want to create next. I'm going to go View, Configure, Back, and let's take a look. We'd like to actually create our jewelry chest next. So I'm going to click on Jewelry Chest and press Open. Now we have that jewelry chest in here. I'm going to scale that down. So it's proportionally in scale with everything else. And I'd like to put this jewelry chest not in the front orthographic view, but in the top orthographic view. So to do that, I'm going to come into top orthographic view, hit my middle mouse button, or press this button here. Again, View, Configure, Back. Click on my jewelry chest, press Open, and then we need to scale that down proportionally. There we go. I want to turn off my other chair and table, so I'm going to hit my Option mouse button and paint these red, just drag over them. And now I have my jewelry chest. I like the way that's looking, so I'm going to use this as my reference image and start off with a cube. So here I have my cube. I'm going to press T for transform, scale that down, E for move. So here I have the height. I'm happy with the height. I'm going to take my width, bring that out. Now I'm happy with my width. I'd like to be able to see my jewelry chest and this at the same time. So I'm going to go under Display, Lines. And now that I have that, I'm going to take a look at that, not just on my top view. I'm going to take a look at it in my right view. So the height of my jewelry chest is approximately correct. There we go. And we need to split this jewelry chest in half. So I'm going to choose to do that by going here, going to zoom in, and I'm going to take this from a primitive to a polygon by pressing our button here that says Make Editable. Now we've taken it from a primitive into a polygon, and I'm going to start using my knife tool to split this up. So cube, I'm going to go to edge mode. I'm going to come down to my knife tool and go to loop path cut. And look at that. Now I can separate the top and bottom of the jewelry chest. So now I have the top and bottom. Maybe I'd like to put it a little further up. So now I have that. And I'd like to separate that. So I'm going to press on my cube. I'm going to click on this tool here, which is very useful. Loop selection. I'm going to click on faces mode. And look at that. I can select a whole loop of edges, and that's very helpful. So I selected this whole loop over here. Now I'm going to select the top face, and I want to separate the top and bottom of the jewelry chest. So I am going to right click and look at all the tools that we have here. I would like to split this into a top portion of the chest and the bottom portion. So I selected all of the faces on the top. I'm going to come over to split. And when I do that, we have now a top section and a bottom section. So I'm going to call my top section after I did the split top. I'm going to turn the top off. And now you notice we have a bottom section as well. So I'm going to call this bottom. I'm going to drag it underneath the top, which you don't need to do, but I like to do that. So now I came over to thicken. I'm going to press on D for extrude. And here is the tool if you want to press on that individually, extrude. I'm going to select the top face, of which I have to tell it what I want to extrude, pressing on Shift. And now I'm taking that up to the top. So now I have this full-sized box here. Now that I've done that, I'd like to make cuts in this top part of the box so I can replicate these sections here in my jewelry box. So I'm going to click on bottom. I'm going to make sure that I'm on my edges mode. So there's just three things to remember. What you would like to affect, I'd like to affect the edges of my polygon. Then I'd like to affect my knife tool. And then I'd like to say I'd like to make a loop path cut. And we can make individual cuts here to replicate this box that we see. So I'm going to come in. I want to replicate this. I'm going to make a cut here, a cut here, one cut here, one cut here, and we're just replicating what we see. Now you can see that we've replicated most of the lines here. Let's see what happens if we're going to go over and we're going to remove some of this typology we don't need. So to do that, we're going to make sure we're on edges mode. Then we're going to go into select. We're going to select these lines that we no longer need because these compartments are going to be larger here. We're going to right click and we're going to look at all these tools we have to use. We're going to go to dissolve. So right click dissolve. And we dissolved the top portion, this portion here, and we can do the bottom section as well. Right click, dissolve, and no, we no longer have the topology there. So we got rid of that. We also want to get rid of these. I'm shift clicking, right click, dissolve. We got the top section. Now we want to get the bottom section. Right click, dissolve. Aha, so I'm happy with that. I can even be more precise by getting rid of these, which we don't really need to do, but I'll just do that to make it simpler. I'm going to rack it in to make this smaller. We'd like to get rid of this and this. I'd like to get rid of these two. I'd like to get rid of, oh, I'll keep that in. And right click, dissolve. Again, there's all these separate pieces for the top and bottom of the box. Right click, dissolve. There we go. So now that we've created the typology for the jewelry box, I'd like to create some insets and then create the depth for the box. So I can do that by clicking on this, and let's select all these different compartments of the jewelry box. These we're going to place the keys inside of here. I like to do it like this by right-clicking, give it a little inset by clicking and dragging inward. And then I am going to extrude downwards by pressing D, or I could press this button here, extrude, and slide that straight down. And now we have all the depth to the jewelry box. I'm going to place something over here, so I don't want to extrude that downwards. So I'm liking the way that looks. I'm going to save, and then File, Save Incremental in case we crash. And then I'm going to come over to the top of the box and turn off the bottom of the box. And let's add some thickness to the top of the box and some bevels. So I'm going to come over to Edge Mode. I'm going to select Loop Selection. I'm going to select my top, and look at this. I can select this whole ring when selecting, I have the whole ring selected. I'm then going to right-click and come down to Bevel. So here, we're just using a few tools. This is the Bevel tool. I'm going to click and drag, and here is a nice bevel. If I come down to Attributes under Bevel, I have a lot of different modes that I can add a lot of detail to this. I can choose, instead of fixed distance, radial, proportional. I'm going to choose fixed distance, subdivision. Look at that. Now I have a lot more detail here to make the top of the box more ornate. So now I have the top of the box here. Let's give this some more detail. I like to give at least 3 levels of detail. I'm going to click on top. I'm going to be recycling some of the tools I've been using by going to here, selecting the top section, right-clicking, and going to Inset. Right-click, Inset, right-click, inset, then going to D for extrude, coming up a little bit, coming over here again, inset, pulling this up, and there's so many different things that we can do to make this interesting. I might choose to pull this up. Here's the top of our box now. So now that we have the top of the box, let's close this lid off by doing a bridge. And so to do a bridge from this to this, I'm going to select weld, and now we have a top of the box finished. I'm going to turn on the bottom of the box. I'm going to click the top, press E, press on model mode, and we're going to take that straight down so it's lying. Now we have a closed box. I'd like it to be able to open up. So what I'm going to do is select the top of the box, and we're going to move our axis. We're going to click on Enable Axis, and that is right up here. If I hover over it, Enable Axis is turned on. And I'd like to make sure by going into 4-up mode that we first have moved this to the top where the seam of the box is, number 1. And number 2, we need to take this blue arrow all the way to the back. Let's confirm that by zooming in. And yes, it is right there where the hinge would be. Once I've confirmed that, I'm going to turn off Enable Axis by pressing on this box here. And let's try opening up the box. I'm going to press on R for rotate. I'm going to click on my red handle. Look at that. We can open this jewelry box and close it. So that way we can animate this in the future. I'm going to have this open so we can work on it. And there we go. We have our simple jewelry chest. Let's give it a wood texture. So I'm going to click on the top. I'm going to come back over. I'm going to make sure I'm on wood. And I'm going to choose a nice texture that's going to contrast with the table color. I like the wood chestnut. So I'm going to give the top of the box the wood chestnut. I'm going to give the bottom of the box a wood chestnut. But I'm going to probably, as I get more into this project, going to give maybe some green felt to the inner faces to help them to give some more detail to what we have here. So we'll do that in the next section of our project. But now we have, if we take a look, we have our tables. We have our table, chairs. I'm going to move the chairs slightly back. And I'm going to take the jewelry box up and put it on top of the table. So Option G, we'll call this chest. And we're going to raise that to the top of the table. Lower that down. Press T for transform. and I'm happy with that. So now we have our tables, chairs, and jewelry chest. And that's ready to animate. I'm going to press save. And that's the last part of this video. Thank you.